Appeals for calm as nationalist fury over Drumcree turns to violence across the north. The Taoiseach discusses the crisis in a telephone conversation with British Prime Minister Tony Blair. And the Duns Tribunal adjourns to consider documents from Charlie Haughey. Good evening, welcome to 6-1. Also on the programme this evening, a warning that the scandal of child sex abuse by clergy could eventually bring down the Catholic Church.
The Finance Minister says the government's policy on new EU funds will be to get the maximum for Ireland. And a warm welcome as the Irish youth soccer team return from their triumph in Malaysia.
But first, the Taoiseach Bertie Ahern and the British Prime Minister Tony Blair have had a 10-minute telephone conversation to discuss the developing crisis in Northern Ireland, following yesterday's Orange March in Portadown. There's been widespread rioting in nationalist areas throughout the north, with security forces coming under gun and petrol bomb attack and firing plastic bullets in reply. In Belfast, two 14-year-old boys were among the injured. One, a Catholic, was hit by a plastic bullet and is in intensive care in hospital. The other, a Protestant, suffered gunshot wounds to his shoulder. A number of roads are still blocked by hijacked vehicles, and there have been several bomb alerts in Belfast this afternoon. The Northern Ireland Secretary Mo Mowlam said the violence had been orchestrated and called for its immediate end. This evening, the Catholic bishops in the north appealed for calm, saying they were appalled by the events of the last 24 hours. The worst of the violence was in Belfast and Derry, with disturbances also in Newry, Portadown, Lurgan and a number of other towns.
Disturbances continued this afternoon in West Belfast, Derry and other nationalist areas, as the RUC's decision on the Drumcree March saw some of the worst scenes of rioting for many years. Petrol bombers set fire to two buses on the White Rock Road, and bus services in this and other areas have been withdrawn or diverted. A number of other vehicles were also hijacked. In the Lenadoon area of West Belfast, shots were fired at security forces who returned fire, and in a separate incident there, a 14-year-old boy received serious head injuries after he was apparently hit by a plastic bullet fired by the RUC. He's in intensive care at the Royal Victoria Hospital. Another 14-year-old suffered gunshot wounds to his shoulder when a gunman opened fire on police close to the so-called Peace Line at Springfield Road. The youth was guarding a bonfire on the Loyalist side at Ainsworth Avenue. Gunfire was also directed at the RUC on the Grosvenor Road, the Old Park Road, Ardoyne and Crumlin Road, where a bullet hit a policeman's helmet. In a number of cases, the RUC fired back. In Armagh this afternoon, several main roads were still blocked by the wrecks of cars, which had been hijacked and burnt.
In Newry, there were a series of overnight hijackings of lorries, vans and cars. The Crown buildings in the town were burned out, and the Buttercrane shopping centre also came under attack. The road into Newry from Dundalk was particularly badly hit, with another hijacking this afternoon.
Even after lunchtime today, smoke was still rising from the residue of last night's destruction. Newry is pitted with the bones of burned-out vehicles, with traffic partly choked by the series of makeshift barriers, but still moving. Charlie Smith's the chairman of Newry and Mourne District Council. He's dismayed by what's happened.
I'd have to say that it has brought a lot of doom and gloom into Newry itself, a magnificent town that was doing so well up until last night.
This was once the Social Security Office. The Department of Economic Development had a branch here as well. Last night, rioters prevented firemen from tackling the blaze. Today, all the firemen could do was check that the flames were finally out. This afternoon, Newry is counting the cost of last night's disturbances and fearing that the full bill hasn't yet been paid. More disturbances and more costs are expected. Later, there was another hijacking, leaving even less room for traffic to get through. Today, quite a number of Newry shops closed early. Last night, the Buttercrane Centre too was attacked. Rioters smashed their way in a ram raid.
Well, we had 7 shops that suffered superficial damage, mostly glazing panels broken, and out of those we had 3 that were entered by the people who entered the centre, and there was some looting went on.
No one can yet say precisely how much this destruction will cost, although Charlie Smith, the council chairman, believes it will be in the millions. It was an expression of nationalist anger over Drumcree, but Mr. Smith says he hopes people will now stop and think.
I would be prevailing people to act calmly as such. I think it's a time now for people to stand back, be very careful of what they say and what they do.
Police in the north have issued the following telephone number for motorists wishing to drive to Newry or through other parts of Northern Ireland. It's 08012 32 574 333.
In their telephone conversation this afternoon, the Taoiseach and the British Prime Minister concentrated on trying to move the political process forward in the north. Both leaders stressed the need for calm. Mr Ahern told Mr Blair he hoped others will do likewise.
The conversation between the two leaders lasted 10 minutes and was described by the Taoiseach as positive and constructive. Mr Ahern reiterated his sense of disappointment at yesterday's events, and he and the Prime Minister discussed the fallout from the decision to allow the Drumcree march to go ahead. Earlier today at government buildings, the Taoiseach described his reaction to the violence which followed the march.
Any kind of violence, it has to be condemned. The frustrations of nationalist people, I think, is understood, but I would just far prefer to see all these matters dealt with and handled in a peaceful way. And I was talking to the party chairman this morning, Rory O'Hanlon, who is in the north in Garvaghey Road all day yesterday and Saturday night, and he told me the great efforts that were made by the community to prevent any violence, and I hope that that is what happens in the days ahead. There are important issues that can only be dealt with by concentrating on dialogue and the political solution, and that's, as I said yesterday, we must redouble our effort to try to move that forward, and that's certainly what I'll be doing, and that's what I'll be saying to the Prime Minister today.
Following the phone conversation, a government spokesman said it had focused mainly on how to get the political process moved forward. Mr Ahern stressed the fact that he's been trying to calm the situation, a point accepted by Mr Blair, the need for which he himself emphasised earlier today in London.
We obviously want people to behave sensibly and for calm to return, and we are not going to give up in the search for a peaceful and lasting settlement of the problems in Northern Ireland, because the vast majority of people, whether they're Protestant or Catholic, want that peace, and we will do our best and carry on doing our best to achieve it.
The two men are expected to keep in touch on the issue by phone, and the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Ray Burke, and the Secretary of State, Mo Mowlam, will discuss it further when they meet in Belfast tomorrow.
Dr Mo Mowlam said she understood the anger and frustration in the nationalist community, but said the street violence served no purpose. She said she'd be meeting the Orange Order to discuss upcoming marches, and she expected their attitude to reflect what had happened over the weekend. A statement from the Catholic bishop said the hierarchy was appalled by the events of the last 24 hours, and they appealed to young people to refrain from acts of violence.
As the disorder across Northern Ireland continued, Mo Mowlam was meeting the RUC Chief Constable and leading figures in the North's economy to assess the damage being caused by what she called a campaign of orchestrated violence.
I understand the anger there in the nationalist community, but nothing justifies orchestrated violence that we've seen over the last 24 hours. I appeal to everyone and all those with influence to call for an end to the violence immediately.
She said she would be meeting residents' groups and the loyal institutions, and made it clear she'd be expecting a positive response in discussions on upcoming marches.
When I see members of the Orange Order today, I will expect to see some willingness and understanding of the events of this weekend, reflected in their words and actions during the days ahead. There can and should be no triumphalism.
As the Garvaghey Road got back to normal after the weekend trauma, though, there was a cold shoulder for Dr Mowlam. Brendan McKenna said he wouldn't be speaking with her, while Father Eamon Stack said they'd done all they could to quell the disorder after the Orange March. The Catholic primate urged people not to take their frustration onto the streets, but said that parishioners on the Garvaghey Road had been subject to injustice over the weekend.
It was ironic that they were prevented from going to Mass so that other people could have a choice of ways of returning from their divine worship. I think that if there's going to be any lasting peace, it must be based on justice and equality for all.
a call echoed by Jerry Adams, who said that Mo Mowlam shouldn't shoulder all the responsibility for the decision.
I'm saying that it's much more than she who was involved in this decision, and the responsibility needs to rest with the entire British government. They took the decision. I also want to say that we need to steer a way out of these difficulties in a very clear-headed and calm way, and that is a shared responsibility. And Mr. Blair, therefore, has to point out and has to spell out how he hopes to build a peace process on the back of decisions like that taken this weekend.
Well, David Davenport joins us now from Belfast. David, after the scenes of the weekend, it looks as if things can only get worse. Or is that too pessimistic an assessment?
Well, I wouldn't say that's an entirely accurate assessment, in the sense that both governments will be sitting down together at Stormont tomorrow to assess the situation. And it's pretty clear that the Irish government is intent on not heaping any public blame on Tony Blair's administration. The comments so far have been fairly low-key. I think there's a shared concern that politics does remain the only way forward, and that both governments will have to just get on with it. The hope is that this cycle of violence on the streets that we're witnessing at the moment will have worked itself out before the 12th of July marches next weekend, which are a matter of obvious concern, particularly the march on the Ormeau Road, which is hotly disputed by nationalists and which has caused trouble in the last 2 years.
Whatever about the public stance of the Irish government, what will they be saying to Mo Mowlam in private tomorrow?
Well, the Irish government has had contact at various levels with Dr. Mowlam's office. What they've been keen to do is to assess what strategy the British government has for getting through the next couple of weeks. At the moment, I think all the exchanges are being kept fairly low level in an obvious attempt not to inflame the situation. But I think there's very much a sense that the governments are, for the time being at least, mere onlookers.
Well, how damaged is Mo Mowlam by the events of the past weekend?
Well, I think one thing has emerged from all this, and that is that the honeymoon which Mo Mowlam had enjoyed with the nationalist community has well and truly ended. I think that what happened on the Garvaghey Road over the weekend, and the justification put forward by the Chief Constable for pushing the march through, has rung very hollow right across the nationalist community. Nobody is really giving very much credence to the justification that it was the lesser of two evils, and that the loyalist paramilitary threat, in effect, was the motivating force behind Mr. Flanagan's decision. I think that justification has, in a sense, caused more problems than it solved for the British government.
Are we likely to see any change in attitude by either government tomorrow?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, Una.
David, are we likely to see any change in attitude by either government?
No, I believe both governments will play a united front at this stage. They realise that if there's to be any hope of an IRA ceasefire, and it must be said that that hope is bound to have receded after the weekend's events, but if there's to be any hope of that being encouraged, that both governments must plough on with the political process. And remember, time is not on their side. The timetable agreed by both governments sees the whole decommissioning issue being sorted out by the end of this month, and real substantial discussions getting underway in September. Now, that's a very ambitious timetable, particularly after the events of the last week, but it is one that they're still sticking to. And if that's to be realised, there has to be a united front between Dublin and London.
David Davenport in Belfast, thank you very much for talking to us.
Now the rest of this evening's news. The Dunn's Payments Tribunal was adjourned today for 24 hours to allow the legal team to consider a statement and documents furnished by former Taoiseach Charles Haughey. The documents had been expected last Friday, but were only handed over 5 minutes before this morning's sitting of the tribunal. Counsel for Dunn's Stores asked for a copy of the statement because the company will be seeking the return of the £1.3 million which Ben Dunn gave to Mr Haughey.
Charles Haughey's counsel, Ian McGonigal, told the tribunal